Good evening to all. I am Suraj Vaipalkar, a new graduate student in Texas A&M University. So it's a great honor to welcome our today's seminar speaker. So it's with a lot of pleasure I welcome Mr. Jam Van Antwerp, who is the Vice President and General Manager of the Texas Division of Greenleaf Nursery Company. So Jim is a proud 1990 graduate of Texas A&M University, where he pursued his BS in horticultural science. So during his BS studies, so he majorly concentrated on nursery management and nursery production, and he also concentrated on horticulture business as well. So he started his earlier career with home gardening. After that, he started his own nursery laboring, and then he upgraded himself to a nursery management. So with a lot of experience in the field of horticulture, and because of his great leadership qualities, he got an opportunity to serve as a vice president in Flowerwood Nursery, and now currently he is working as a vice president in Greenleaf Nursery. So just now I would like to welcome him to deliver his talk on my horticulture journey in unexpected twist and surprising turns. So he has got years of experience in the field of horticulture. So I request him to deliver a talk so that we will enlighten little bit about more and more about the horticulture. So welcome him, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. All righty. First, I want to say thank you for having me. This is a great honor for me to come back and speak to the department. So we'll dive right in. I kind of like to work with questions along the way, if you don't mind. If you've really got a burning desire to ask a question, go ahead and pose your question, and we'll jump into the presentation. All right. So let's see. Not working.
You might have to click your mouse one time first.
Okay. Let's see. No.
Click the mouse on the screen.
There we go. Okay, so when I was invited, we'd like to hear about your time in A&M horticulture, where your degree led to, your career, and where are you today? So where am I now is going to be my first fast question to answer. What do I do? That's not so easy to answer. How did I get here? It's a long journey, lots of twists and turns, and then my time in A&M horticulture. Okay, let's go this way. Okay, so this is where it all started. This is a picture that my mother had of me after I dug around in her garden, playing with the dirt. So this is where it started. And then in grade school, I grew tomatoes. This was my first real production experience, was growing 9 tomato plants in what was a sandbox, became a raised bed. We produced over 300 pounds of tomatoes that summer. Then there was a long interlude in my work experience. In 1985, I found myself in a nursery called Springdale Nursery in Dunellen, Florida. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. This nursery no longer exists, but while I was there, I was nursery labor, I did production jobs, and I did some retail customer assistance. That led me to understand I didn't want to work retail. That's not my nature. Then I found myself at Flowerwood Nursery in Bushnell, Florida, 1985 to 86. So I went down to that nursery. I had come back to Mobile, and I went back down to Central Florida with the first load of plants to this brand new facility. So I helped actually physically build the nursery there as the foreman. I learned many aspects of plant care, production, and operation, and this is all before going to school. So I had some practical experience. My big surprise there was learning I didn't know how to manage and lead people. So I spent a year there, and my big learning experience there was how do I interact with people when I'm supervising them. So that was my early experience actually having authority and responsibility to lead people. And it really helped me form for the rest of my career and when I got to school dealing with people. This is Flowerwood Nursery, Bushnell, Florida today. When I went down there, there were no plants, and we built the blocks in these 2 areas right here. So the rest of this growth happened after I left. So that was my first experience, was on this production facility. Then I came to Texas A&M. I did a search while I was in Florida of horticulture schools, because I had kind of the aha moment while I was working there. Hey, this is what I really want to do. It fit my personality: organizing, building, producing. And we had a gentleman at Flowerwood who was a graduate at A&M. He talked to me about it. And at that time, when I searched all the horticulture schools across the Southeast, the two accreditation societies had Texas A&M's department, and Cornell's department is either one or two. So I decided I'd come pay a visit. And when I got here, I learned that inside horticulture, you have 9 options at that time to specialize. And you had an outside emphasis specialization. And one of them was wholesale nursery production, and that was what I was interested in. All the other universities had just a horticulture degree, no specialty, no emphasis. So I came here. While I was here, I did an internship back at Flowerwood in Loxley, Alabama. I was in the propagation department, so it gave me some practical experience in propagation. I also worked as a student worker for the Department of Entomology during one summer when I was here taking the required summer classes. So the interesting twist working there is I was raising insects in the biological control facility that's along Agronomy Road. Dr. John Smith was my employer advisor, and I got into that job because I took the beekeeping class. And he asked me, I don't have a student worker, are you interested? So that's how I got into that job. But my job was raising corn earworms that, borers that bored into the corn in one area, and then we were raising the predatory wasps in another area. So my whole job was to keep those cycles of those two insects going and put the wasps on the borers so that they could be predaceous on those borers and lay the eggs. So that gave me a lot of appreciation for biological control early on. So I'm at A&M, and these are my club activities in a list, but we were very active in clubs. I was the nursery committee chairman for the Hort Club. We actually started a nursery growing some ornamental plants. I became the vice president. That's where I planned the trips that the club would take over the summer.
How did you fund those trips?
So we had the hydroponic greenhouse where we grew tomatoes. About 2/3 to 3/4 of the greenhouse was hydroponic tomatoes. And then we grew plants for a spring plant sale. The Hort Club had a spring plant sale. So we sold the tomatoes to local restaurants and grocery stores and things like that. So the trip basically was funded from the revenue of the club activities, the plant sale and the ongoing sale of the hydroponic tomatoes. The FOH Club did a similar thing. They had plant sales at a more regular frequency, and they would do what was called a big spring break plant trip somewhere. So, a volunteer club is a lot different than working in a business. In a volunteer club, you have those who are going to do, those who are going to kind of do, and those who want to be told what to do when you get there. They want to follow, they want the interaction, the social. So, sometimes you start off as, I'm just coming to be social, but you end up being, hey, I'm going to lead this thing and, have an idea where I want it to go. So I was a member of both the Hort Club and the FOH Club. And I served both of those clubs as a leader. One of the interesting things that I never thought I'd be doing was I went on some ASHS meetings, regional and national. And I ended up from 1988 to 89 being the national greenleaf editor. The club branches published a small magazine that had news from all the hort clubs all over the country. So that year, I solicited all those articles and put the thing together and sent it out. The next year, I was the president. I actually graduated before my term was over. And while I was working on my first job out of A&M, they, graciously allowed me to go to the meeting, which was out in Arizona that year. All right, so finishing up at A&M with my BS in horticulture, May of 1990, I specialized in nursery management and production with a study emphasis in business. Now, what I want to talk about might not sound like horticulture. It's not very typical what I'm going to focus on in my talk today. So in business, I took accounting, operations management, and business law. So those are the 3 classes that I took for my 9 hours of business emphasis. I'll come back to that. So my first job out was propagation supervisor at Greenleaf Nursery in El Campo, Texas. So right out of the bat, I've got about 54 employees, 8 million cuttings a year you got to root. While I was there, I completely updated the propagation manual from the experiences I had. And that was interesting because when I first got there, they told me, you've got these 3 tasks. You got to update the propagation manual, you've got to learn how to root dwarf Yopon at a higher percentage, and you've got to learn how to root this azalea crop at a higher percentage. So out of the gate, I tried to rewrite that propagation manual, but I just didn't know enough. So I put it back down, gave up on it. And after I'd had 2.5, almost 3 years experience, I sat down and started writing, and it was like, oh, this is easy now, So I didn't have the knowledge when I first got there. The 2 varieties. So the first surprise was we were rooting azaleas in a fog house because of the water quality. We had an RO system, and we put in a fog system, was there when I got there to root azaleas. Azaleas are kind of tricky to root. The water was bad. When I got there, they were doing it in a 98 cell tray. Well, those cell trays got kind of heavy with water in that fog. And one day, a supplier just sent us, along with our 98 cell trays, a 128. And the crew comes to me and says, well, what do we do with this? I said, well, just put it out there and see what happens. Fast forward about 6 months, and we're about to pot all those liners up into bigger containers to grow on. And I'm at my desk working, and the crew walks in and says, what do you want us to do with this cell tray? And it's like 100% solid rooted. Our average take on most azalea varieties, Kurumis, Robin Hills, even the southern indicas in that fog house was anywhere from 50 to 60 to 70%. Not real good. The first year I was there, I actually had to go to the Mobile, Alabama area where a lot of azalea growers were and buy liners to supplement our own production. So I'm looking at that tray and I'm like, holy cow, what's going on here? So we potted them up. I went and talked to my vice president about it. I actually showed him the tray. I said, look at this. So we made a decision to go ahead and put all production in 128s the next year, right off the bat, not any more trialing. But we reasoned, A, there's going to be a lot more cuttings inside that greenhouse, same square footage, and B, there's a likelihood we're going to have a lot better take. Now, what I noticed about that tray is the drainage hole on both the 128 and the 98 was exactly the same size. So I reasoned in my 128, I had better air circulation for the roots. And we produced a heavy, humid environment with that fog system. So next year, what happens? We have extra liners. It was a success. So my message is on that is you just don't know where your success is going to come from sometimes. Sometimes it's just dumb luck, okay? And an openness to try something. Don't get knocked into, no, this is the way we do it. We're not going to try something different. So that was an early visual lesson for me on what can happen if you really stay open to the ideas. This one I didn't expect at all. I was out looking at our crops and found a Clara in the crop. It grew differently than all the other Claras. So I segregated it, showed my vice president. We put it in the Quonset houses, started taking cuttings, and lo and behold, they decided to patent the plant. So this is, you know, I'm not a breeder. I don't claim to be a breeder or a super plantsman or anything. But in my career, I actually have a plant that's got a patent on it with my name as the sole inventor. This artificial name that they put on patented plants, GRE is for greenleaf and Van is for Van Antwerp. So it wasn't a huge commercial success. It's a very small Clara with smaller leaves, but it had a little niche out in the market. All right. So then my next opportunity was to move to South Alabama, back for Flowerwood Nursery and the ownership of Flowerwood Nursery, to actually build a new nursery. So in Grand Bay, Alabama. So at the peak, I had about 40 employees. What I was doing there also was managing all the nursery accounts, all the financial accounts for this new startup facility. I was doing all the propagation, all the production, pest management, sales, equipment maintenance, you name it, all the way across the board. So I was there about 9 years. Big task, of course, was supervise the building of the facility. That involves gluing the pipe, you know, putting out the gravel, you know, where do things go, mapping it out. I actually learned how to use we called it R2D2, but it was a laser level surveying device. So I surveyed the whole 300 acres of land myself with that device. Surprise. Okay, so this is where you get some interesting surprises. As general manager, I'm the one that has to answer all the questions and deal with all the issues, right? So the local utility for Grand Bay, the water utility, came to the door one day, said, I need you to turn off all your water today because we're doing this major change over at the pumping station for the utility. And I kind of looked at him for a second, and then I started laughing. I said, you're funny. You know, I really did. I started laughing. Number one, because the crop couldn't go, you know, 24 hours without water. It was like June or July. But the thing that was really funny in my head was that he thought I was using his water to water my crops. We had wells and surface ponds built. We were internally contained, and all our water went on the crops, except for the city water we used for the employee bathrooms and the lunchroom and that kind of thing. So he looks at me and says, but you're our number 2 user of water behind the truck stop up at the interstate. I said, well, I've got 40 employees and we're here all day long. He said, wow. I said, you can turn the water off, we'll be all right. So that's kind of an unexpected, what are you going to deal with when you're managing a facility? Twist. So we had a visit from Japan. Back at that time, there were controlled release fertilizers were kind of young, and there was a domestic fertilizer that had a very early release curve. Sometimes if you weren't careful, you burned up your plants, okay? In the late 80s, early 90s to mid 90s, a fertilizer called Nutricoat came into the industry. Nutricoat originated in Japan with a company called Nichimen. So it didn't have that front end release and became a nursery-wide kind of phenomenon all of a sudden overnight in its first couple of years. People were abandoning the domestic company because this was so much better. Well, lo and behold, one year we get to the end of summer. I've been throwing top dress fertilizer because my readings EC are lower than they've been in a long time. And we get into fall, and my lead supervisor comes in and says, "What's with the color in the azaleas?" And we go out and look at it. And we had patches in the beds that were off color, a lot more stunted, not real good looking. And then we had patches that were just kind of still green, but they were going, dormant for the fall. But there were patches that just totally lost their color because we'd quit throwing the top dress because you want to slow your plants down going into the winter. So I called the representative out and I said, "What's going on with this NutriCoat that's on the top?" And they checked it. And we had prills that were super hard in the off color, and then the regular normal soft prills in the good color. Well, long story short, Nietzscheman had decided to improve the fertilizer because it was originally done for rice production in Japan. So what they had done is made that the coat on the fertilizer, what they considered more perfect. And the release curve that it did have at the beginning, which was, nice and gentle and really did a good thing for us, and it would last the 360 days. Well, now a 360-day fertilizer lasted 500 days. It wasn't releasing. But that's what the rice liked, but it's not what the nursery industry liked. So I actually ended up with 8 guys from Nietzscheman out of Tokyo to come look because I was one of the few places that had lots from the previous year and the new year sitting side by side in the bed for them to see what the results of their change was. So that was kind of an interesting thing. Long story short, a lot of people migrated back to the domestic product and or the Florican began blending NutriCoat with other fertilizers. But that was very interesting. Fun new skill. I learned to drive a track hoe. So the reason I did that is because I was excavating for retention ponds. So we would capture our water here at this dam, and the intention was to eventually put a pump station on it. When I was at Baywood / Grand Bay Flowerwood, we built this section here. And then, of course, you can see they've expanded since I left that facility. Okay. So then I got a phone call after I'd been there 9 years. And my reaction was, "You want me to do what? What is it you want me to do?" From the corporate office. So the corporate office wanted me to come to the corporate office and be vice president of sales and marketing. Why in the world would you want me to do that? I'm by nature an introvert. I don't, go out and do sales. That's not my thing. I knew it from the beginning. I wasn't a salesperson. In fact, when I was A&M my senior year, I went to an interview with a fellow who was hiring sales staff, but he had put in his little flyer that he was building a new production nursery. So that was my, said, "Are you hiring for the production nursery?" He said, "No, but I can give you a sales job at X dollars." "Nah, that's not me. I don't want to do it." He says, "Well, at least you know yourself. So know yourself. It's important to know yourself." Okay, so I took the job because he says, "I need somebody in here to organize everything." Well, I'm an organizer to a certain extent. But I was supervising the day-to-day operations sales department. I found myself negotiating vendor agreements and business with both Lowe's and Home Depot. I initiated a new catalog concept for the company and new communication formats. A lot of that had to do with our trade shows, pulling all our locations together. Because what would happen, we'd go to, say, the Atlanta trade show, and every location would have its own booth instead of all Flowerwood in one spot, where we could share and communicate a lot more fluidly, if you will. So we put everybody in one spot and organized all that. Twist. So we had 2 facilities in Florida at that time. One came out of M&I which is Metal Industries Nursery. The owner of Metal Industries, which is a whole different industry, had started nurseries as kind of a hobby on the side. And Flowerwood was running one because he'd gotten out of it and had our Bushnell facility. Well, lo and behold, this fellow's son, after he died, decided, I want to develop the land. Well, so I went down there to explain to him and said, that's nice, but you have to understand it's going to take us over a year to evacuate in an orderly fashion. So my experience was actually managing or directing that evacuation of that site and moving product either up to Alabama or to our other facility. And it took roughly a year to evacuate all the plant material. So that was an interesting experience. Also, while I was vice president, I was the point for going to what started out as grower group meetings for brands. Prior to this point, all nursery containers were black. You know, it was black plastic, no branding, etc. Now, I've talked to you some of you about this at lunch, so I'm sorry for the repeat, but a fellow by the name of Anthony Tesler came in from Australia with this line of plants, flower carpet shrub roses. And he invited nurseries to come to that meeting. I wasn't at the first meetings, from all over the country. He was trying to get regional partners all over the country. And he did seminars and meetings on how to be a brand and a group, if you will. Well, a lot of the nurseries that were at those first meetings, one was Bailey's Nursery. They actually didn't participate in flower carpet, but they came out with Endless Summer with Dr. Mike Durr from the University of Georgia. Then Flowerwood Nursery had a breeder named Buddy Lee in Independence, Louisiana, who came to them with these reblooming azaleas, and that became Encore Azalea meeting. So those two brands, you know, part of my career was going to those meetings, learning about marketing and sales and material statistical areas, you know, large metropolitan statistical areas, and how you target your sales. So that was I found that very interesting. Well, then an opportunity came up to be executive director of a startup that the Smiths had on the side that kind of grew out of the Encore Azalea brand, Plant Development Services. So we had a fella who was an outside salesperson we brought in to replace me because, quite frankly, he was better at sales than I was and how to run a sales department. So I moved over here, again, as an organizer, kind of a operations and systems, but I was not sales. But I ended up dealing with plant patents, branding, trademarks, breeders, licensed grower agreements. And one of the interesting things was I was there when Southern Living came to us and said, we've seen what you did with Encore Azalea. We want you to put a brand together under Southern Living Plant Collection. So this goes back to my business law class. You know, these kind of things about how to put together contracts and negotiate deals. You know, when I took that class, I thought it was kind of interesting because we did case studies and all that, but what the most students were interested in was, how do I get out of that traffic ticket that I just got? So the lawyer kind of gave everybody a bunch of tips on that. But I found the case law was very interesting, and that background knowledge helped me with writing these contracts and analyzing, you know, what needs to be in a contract and what doesn't need to be in a contract. Well, lo and behold, I'm looking at a catalog from one of the other brands, and they've used a brand name in one of their plants that we had the registered trademarks for. So in the industry, the growers who are in all these grower groups tend to be in each of the grower groups. We're not like exclusive to one grower group or the other. Good nurseries participate in the grower groups and pick and choose the plants that work best in their climatic zone. So we all have relationships with each other. This is the importance of relationships. So I saw that come out, and it was right before what used to be the Mid-Am show in Chicago in January. So I'm ready to go. I've got his catalog, and he was running the other brand, and I was running this brand. So I asked to speak with him. We went off site and sat down, and I said, I pulled out the catalog and dropped it, and I said, you name this plant. And he, the light bulb goes off. Oh my goodness. I can't believe we did that, So in other industries, that would have ended up in a cease and desist order with a lawsuit and all kinds of unfriendly activity. In our industry, the two of us were able to come to an agreement. He said, oh, we'll change the name right away. It'll be in the catalog as something different next year. So that's the way we handled it, just one-on-one relationship. And that's one of the things I love about this industry is the ability to do those things. So after I had been at PDSI for a while, we brought in another person who was better at marketing, sales, working with breeders than I was. And I was asked to move back to the main company in Loxley. The Easter freeze of 2007, followed by the housing crash of 2008, occurred right about at that same time. So across the Southeast, the Easter freeze of 2007 was a late freeze. How late? There were mature crepe myrtles as far north as Huntsville, Alabama, that had already budded out and were frozen dead to the ground. That's how severe the freeze was. That year we had taken off on sales, and we were thinking, no, this is going to be one of the best years ever. Came to a complete halt. Sales went to half they were before the freeze and never recovered that season. We ended up having a mediocre year. Because of that, we actually cut production at Flowerwood and slowed down. Right on the heels of that comes the housing crash of 2008. So to give you a kind of a magnitude of what that did to our industry and the housing market, prior to that, the Atlanta metropolitan statistical area was issuing 45,000 housing permits a month. Fast forward 2 years later, they're putting out 4,000 housing permits a month, a tenfold drop in development. Well, new housing is one of the places a lot of our plants go. So some of the nurserymen describe that as if we didn't have our seatbelt on, we'd have hit that windshield and been smashed like a bug. So that was a big shakeup in the industry following that. Now my job there was really administrative and working with the CEO. I came back to do strategic planning, forecasting, metric monitoring, and really the big key was watching cash flow, because cash flow became paramount in that environment. And that's where relationships with vendors came in very handy, because we'd negotiate payment terms, we need to do delay billing on this or what have you. So those things helped us even out our cash flow and stay liquid, which is very important if you want to keep the business going. One of the things that came out of it for me was an experience of purchasing plants. So we cut back production at Flowerwood, but there was production all over the Southeast and the West Coast that really hadn't cut back. They didn't really see the problem. So to supplement what we were growing, we decided to go out and purchase plant material and go through our shipping systems. Well, one of our largest customers at the time, Lowe's, was giving us more patch areas, and our production couldn't fill those patch areas without the ability to go out and supplement. They also came up with a strategy where they wanted to stop bringing in plants directly from the West Coast into their stores because they were coming in too big of quantities for the stores. You know, they wouldn't sell through fast enough. So they asked us to cross-dock that material. So I ended up going to the West Coast for a couple of years, buying plant material, bringing it to Loxley to mix with what we were already selling to those stores, but at smaller quantities that would more likely sell through those stores and be more profitable for everybody involved. So that was a very interesting experience to go out and do that. So during that same time frame, 2009, 2010, 2011, many nurseries went out of business. Nurseries that were over leveraged, had too much debt, family operations that were too small to stay in the plant flow stream, nurseries that wouldn't participate in the changes in the plant flow stream, like selling their product to a flowerwood so it gets to market. So for an example, when I started going to Oregon to buy plants, there were nurseries everywhere. I went back there 5 years later after we'd had a break in purchasing because Lowe's, you know, they're famous for changing up things. And then Home Depot wanted us to go out there, so I'm back out there. As I was driving around Oregon, I realized, wait a minute, I used to see a nursery here and here. So I started asking the local nurseryman, how much production has disappeared in Oregon? I was thinking on the, you know, magnitude of about 40 to 50%. To my surprise, they all confirmed, oh yeah, half, it's all gone, half of it's gone. So half the production in Oregon at that time that was there before the crash disappeared. Fields got turned into blueberry patches or whatever, but it was gone. So then I had an experience that I never saw coming until the day it came up, is there was a large retail company that filed for Chapter 11 reorganization as a customer of ours. Such a customer that we qualified to have a seat on the unsecured creditors committee for that case. The case is in federal court in Atlanta, Georgia. So me not having employees and other day-to-day responsibilities, mostly strategic planning and such, you know, I volunteered, okay, I'll go figure out what this is about and see what I can do. So I got hold of the book on Chapter 11, bankruptcy law, started going to the meetings. The one thing I figured out how to do was to defend our company's money that we had already received from this company as payments, because a Chapter 11 estate, the trustee can sue back and get your money that you've already received if you don't know how to defend. And it has to do with things like ongoing business. Can you show ongoing business? You didn't change your pattern of business. Did you send more product after you got paid for this product? So there was all kinds of things that I learned. And I ended up putting spreadsheets and sending them to the lawyers who were the trustees and defended all that money. But I also was able to get payment out of the estate on what's called a 503B, which is the business you do right before the estate is taken to Chapter 11. So we ended up getting more back than we expected. The real interesting thing in that was we were sitting in a meeting of the committee, and these high-powered financial advisors are in there pitching the first plan of how to resurrect or take care of this company. And they come in, and this, you have to understand, this is January. And they announce, we're going to have a plant auction, and we're going to invite all the growers to come to the facilities, these nurseries, and buy back the plants that we'd already sold them in January. And there's like 30 retail locations spread out all over Metro Atlanta, Birmingham, and Charlotte, North Carolina. The committee was made up of hard goods suppliers, bag goods suppliers, bird seed suppliers, and I and one other person were the only two nursery representatives. Well, the other nursery representative was actually their CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and he was from Deloitte and Touche, big accounting firm. But that was the job he'd taken after he built his resume at Deloitte and Touche. So I was the only one that really knew plants in the industry. I sat there and I looked at them and I said, well, number one, your annual growers aren't coming because annuals are 12-week, they're dead. Number two, your perennials, you might get a few people. Number three, all the growers are already loaded for spring. We don't have space to put these plants. And I would have to hire a crew to load my truck and pay for their room and board to move all around, So I went through that whole thing with them. And I said, and by the way, we're going to start at 10 cents on the dollar and go down. That's where you're going to resell these plants to. And I'm concerned about what insects and diseases do these plants have on them. They've been sitting out here for, months. They have a shelf life, et cetera. So that was very interesting. The knowledge I had an influence on the direction of the case. And sometimes being the only person in the room with that knowledge is very important, because the creditors committee's job is to protect all the unsecured creditors, not just each individual company. We have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the whole group. So, I laid that all out, and the financial guy sitting there going, are you kidding? I said, no, I'm not. And that plan died. Fortunately, it died because the estate was able to keep selling those plants at retail, and they found a buyer for the company from the West Coast who kept it going, and it's now still a very good customer in the industry for all the grower segments. Okay, so this was a big shakeup. The state of Alabama got the bright idea to pass their own immigration law as if they're going to enforce immigration in just the state of Alabama. We had a lot of Hispanic employees at that time. A lot of the nursery industry did. It wasn't on a H-2A program or anything like that, because it was just permanent resident workers, okay, green card. Well, when they passed that law, every Hispanic and or their spouse who was a citizen picked up and left the state of Alabama. Real easy. There's plenty of states around us to go to and find a job. So that really hurt our workforce at that time. So this prompted a lean flow implementation at our shipping loading dock. We had been talking for years as a management group about what we wanted to do at the nursery to make improvements. And the state of Alabama passed this law, and it was like the momentum builder that pushed us over the edge, if you will. We knew what lean flow was, we just hadn't done it yet. This made us do it. Sometimes you have to be made to do something, or you have to have that aha moment that says, well, it's time to do that. We've been talking about it. So we got a company involved, brought them in, did classes, made huge improvements in our shipping and loading docks operations. We bought new equipment, constructed new equipment, rearranged everything. One of the results was our shipping coordinator came to us one day after we'd implemented. He said, this is incredible, because we used to load trucks, say on Monday, starting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After the implementation, the first truck left the loading dock at 9 o'clock in the morning. And trucks were leaving the docks like on the hour, 2 at a time, all day long. He came to us and said, I used to could only send a truck to Atlanta twice in a week with the old system. Now he could send that same truck round trip to Atlanta 3 times and get us 3 loads out of the same truck. So that was a 33% improvement in carrying capacity for an individual unit. Now, what came out of this when we were in committee talks, from an unexpected direction, we had on the committee somebody from just about everywhere on the nursery, including the shop and maintenance guys. because they were building the new equipment, fabbing stuff for us. So we're talking about how do we organize our supermarket? Do we organize it by common name, scientific name, high sellers, low sellers? You know, how do we geographically do this? And we're talking, you know, how do we set this up so a new employee coming in can learn it that quick? And he's being very quiet and sitting over there listening to us. And finally, he pipes up. He says, you know, I've been at this nursery 25 years, whatever it was. It was a long time. He said, I couldn't tell you the name of the first plant on this nursery. But don't these plants have like an inventory ID number or something? Well, yeah, they sure do. He said, everybody knows numbers. You need to organize it by some kind of product number system. And everybody's sitting there like, well, no kidding. So the dock physically got organized with signage over the top of it where each supermarket rack area was identified by their product ID number. And we put the highest movers in the middle and the low movers towards the outside. So that when the employees came in and shopped, unless they had something that was unusual, they were in one little area, shopping the supermarket, taking it to the tagging tables. And they rarely had to go outside or infrequently to fill their racks. So that employee's idea, not a horticulturalist, doesn't know anything about plants, but was an unexpected, where did that come from? So the dock supervisor came to us after we'd implemented, and what his comment was, I used to have to train people for weeks in the old system. In the new system, I can take a new employee off the street, and in 30 minutes, they can take a rack and shop and fill that rack 100% correctly. So this is where systems can make a huge difference to what you're doing. And this is the Loxley facility. Loading dock, this is the loading dock area right here. So this is where we were working for that implementation. Out here is propagation, growing fields, gutter connect greenhouses, shade houses. These are the bark piles. So this is about a 350 acre nursery. So then I went to a trade show and I was asked if I'd like to come back to Greenleaf Nursery, El Campo, Texas. There's getting to be some retirements coming up. So my job would be Vice President, General Manager of Greenleaf. It was about a year after the initial conversation that I really dove more into it, and I ended up coming back. So as the general manager of this facility, you know, I have not ultimate, but, you know, responsibility for everything that goes on in the nursery. Issues and problems all come to me. And then weather events, you know, I'm out there making sure everybody's doing what they need to do. But basically, my job is to manage production and operation staff for what's currently 480 acres of production on 600 acres of land. I have to work with HR, budgeting expenses, capital spending, rolling stock, what are we going to build, where are we going to build it, that kind of thing. Then I also serve as the agent for the land holding company. So we have some undeveloped property that I manage the leases for those. What's interesting, we put in that lease, you can't grow cotton because we don't want them spreading defoliant right next to the nursery and sending the whiteflies in. He agreed. That was nice. I'm also the point of contact for things like the Coastal Bend Groundwater District, county commissioners, the appraisal district, electric co-op, and other entities. So, and then just recently I negotiated the purchase of 80 acres that were adjacent to the facility so that we can actually plan future expansion. So the twist, is I'm back to building new facility again. So I built nursery in Florida. I built nursery in South Alabama. Now I'm building nursery in Texas. Growing blocks, overwinter structures, shade houses, new well. I'd never put in a well before myself. So in Texas, you have to get a permit from your groundwater district. So I went through that whole process, learned how to permit the well, get bids to build the well. This is a 500-foot well with a 14-inch casing. It produces about 1,500 gallons a minute at the head pipe. So we had to do that because one of our original wells, the casing kept cracking. And the last time we patched it, they looked at it and said, I don't know how long this well's going to last. So the lifeblood of a nursery is the water. So instead of waiting for a disaster to happen, we preemptively put in another well so we would have capacity. The nice thing is we put it in a strategic location that it would also contribute to future expansion. So just a kind of a side note, some of the professional associations and societies I've participated in my career, the Alabama Nursery Landscape Association. I held several leadership positions with that, served on the board of the Gulf State Show for a little while. The South Alabama Nursery Association, again, served on leadership there for a little while. I've been a member of IPPS since 1991, right after I graduated. And if you know or don't know, that association has actually recently changed their name. It's called the International Plant Production Society. In my opinion, it actually reflects the reality of how that organization has changed over the years. And I've served on, some positions in that organization. So that organization has gone from, it's really interesting to look at, focusing on plant propagation in the 60s and 70s, and slowly crept into production practices on growing finished product, and then into breeding and new varieties and all that kind of thing. So what happened is, the society and people talking to each other solved problems in propagation. Well, after about 30 or 40 years, you've solved most of the big problems, and other big problems that affect the health and life of the nursery become paramount. So the society was changing in reality, and the name change actually reflects that reality. So this will allow the society to recruit new members who just looked at the name and said, I'm not a propagator. I don't belong there. So where has my career taken me? My career has taken me to 27 states and Washington, D.C. So all of these states that I've listed, I have visited as a result of this career. Even though I grew up in Alabama, there are parts of Alabama that I toured just because of this career. Went to Washington, D.C. on an American Hort legislative trip. That was a very interesting trip, to say the least. Took the family, we went and did some tour things. It was a great trip. But I've been a lot of places because of this career and where it has led me, all the different job opportunities that I've jumped at and said, yes, I'll do it, kind of thing. I've been able to meet people from around the world. A lot of that had to do with IPPS, and some of it, like I mentioned, I had the visit from Japan when I was at Grand Bay. So I've been able to meet with people from all over the world, exchange ideas, perspectives, etc. Now, I know people, quite honestly, who've gone all over the world doing this more than I have, but this is just to say to you, the door is there if you'll step through it. The opportunities are there. I've seen the rise of brands in the industry. This was actually fascinating to watch and be part of, because it was very generic industry, even though there were patented plants before. The industry as a whole didn't embrace that, weren't doing branding. So I was asked earlier at lunch, what's the importance of branding? How does that really work? Is it you have a good plant and then you brand it, or is it just the marketing that makes it work? Well, it's both, quite frankly. When you put out a brand, you have a brand promise. This is what this product does. If you don't back up that brand promise, what happens? The fickle consumer says, I'm not trying that again. And they spread the word. Well, each of these brands came out with something that had a promise that actually performed. The first three, well, flower carpet was the first, kind of taught our industry how to do it. The next three came from individual nurseries and were individual plant brands. Endless Summer, Encore Azalea, Knockout Rose. And then came umbrella brands, where you'd put nice improved plants, but they weren't going to be the blockbusters that the first three were. And then there are many niche brands now, homegrown edibles, stepables, and things like that. Another thing I've seen during my career is that trade shows, quite frankly, have become less important. Used to go to the TNLA show or the SNA show, and there'd be 10 to 12,000 attendees. You don't get that now. There were lots of regional shows. There were state shows. There was the Mid-Am show in Chicago, along with the Mant show in Baltimore. The Mid-Am show is gone. The SNA show is gone. TNLA still has a show. It's the right time of, well, it's in August. There's not much competition for trade shows at that time. The Gulf States still has a show in Mobile, Alabama on the verge of spring, and there's some West Coast shows. And there's still a couple of little regional shows, but shows are not as important as they used to be. A lot of that has to do with communication technology improvements and just-in-time shipping. So Mr. Smith, Greg Smith Jr., who owns Flowerwood Nursery, kind of put it into perspective for us because he grew up in the industry. He said, when trade shows started, if you wanted to talk to Mr. Pete Pike of Pike Nursery in Atlanta, Georgia, from Mobile, Alabama, you had to call from one switchboard to the other, and he might call you back 2 days later. When you loaded his truck, it left Mobile, went to Atlanta, had 2 flat tires on the way up, got unloaded, and had a flat tire on the way back because the interstate system didn't really exist. And that truck made 1 trip that whole week. A lot of the plant material was booked, sold at the trade shows in the winter, and you stocked retail yards up for the spring and got the material out. Well, over the years, what happened to retail space? It became a lot more expensive as cities grew and that kind of thing. So their turns per square foot became a metric they looked at, and they needed to turn that square foot. Well, communication comes along, cell phones, pictures, email. I can now talk to that customer constantly. I can send them a picture. This is what it looks like. The road systems are better. Computer systems are faster. So not only can we talk about that order this morning, I can put the order in the computer, it can get to the shipping department. We can pull the order, load the truck tomorrow, or at the latest the next day, and that order is on the doorstep of that retail customer the next morning. So instead of one truck making 1 round, as I described, we could do, a truck could make 3 rounds from, say, that Flowerwood location up to Atlanta in a week. So that sped the business up. It sped up a lot faster. Now, what does the future hold? One of the things we're looking at right now is drones for pesticide application, scouting, inventory counting, sales support, going out and taking a picture of the crop instead of somebody driving all over the nursery taking a picture of the crop. We're actually trialing drones at different locations. There are a number of nurseries that have actually purchased drones and are using them. ergonomically friendlier systems. It's not necessarily that it has to be automated, but is it more ergonomically friendly for the employees of today? Autonomous systems. There was a harvest automation robots. There's a new one out called the Burrow. We're looking at these systems to enhance the productivity of our employees. Now you're going to say, are you going to replace people? Well, no, we've got more land to spread out into. But yeah, I can't really find more people to fill that land up. So I need systems to enhance what the current employee group is doing so that we can expand. AI, I have no idea what AI is going to do for us, but that's something out in the future. So we're looking at the future. Questions?
Good to see you back here. You know, we're contemporaries, and
Yep.
You're a great example of coming in here with some experience, growing your knowledge, going out, gathering a whole lot of experience and wisdom. Have you had enough? Certainly, you had enough interactions with young people graduating with a horticulture degree today, maybe from this institution or others. What are they strong in? What are they not strong in? What are young people today? You and I didn't have this.
No, we didn't have cell phones.
So does this compensate? What can you comment on what they really need to be stronger in?
Right, sure. So, and this is true back then as it is now. Students who come out of the university system with a degree, but with also some practical experience, some leadership ability, you know, shown leadership ability, and willingness to not get locked into a specific box are the ones that progress the fastest. Those that come in, no, my job is to do X, and I've never worked with people before, so I don't know how to lead them or manage them. What's a safety program? What do you mean about HIPAA? I can't talk about this person's workplace injury. You know, those are the kinds of things we have to teach after you get there. But if you can learn any of that prior to coming into industry, those students seem to progress faster than those that are kind of have a box around what they're going to do or what they can do. That practical experience and leadership experience is very important.
We are running out of time, so if you have any questions, you can reach out immediately.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jim, for sharing your valuable experience where you mentioned about club activities and the responsibilities that you handle. And now I would like to welcome Mason to offer a gift as a
Oh,
token of love.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. So here we go, sweetie. This is my wife, Allison, and this is our son, Matthew. So I'll give that to you, and you can tell me what part I can have. So, all right. Thank you all. All righty. Thank you. Nice talking to you.